Today we'll be looking at how to make more complex geometries. Yesterday we looked into creating simple primitive objects like a box and creating simple curves like lines and polylines. So we'll just go a little more advanced than that. We'll have your Rhino open, and before we start, I'll just explain some of the tasks we're going to do. So we're going to bring in some reference images, which I put into the chat, and you could download those and use them as guides to creating our profiles and curves in order to create our more complex geometries. And before we do that, let's do a little bit of maintenance in our Rhino. We'll want to create some layers for those items, and that we can place them in and organize our objects within Rhino. So I'll create a new, have your layers tab open. It's that cheesecake little thing. And if you don't have that available, you can simply right click on these tabs and you can find it within this drop down menu. So have that checked on. And we'll create, I guess, like 3 new layers. Our default will be double click to rename, and we can call this reference images. We can call the second one construction lines, and let's call the last one final forms. And it's up to you to decide what colors we could ascribe to each layer. So I'll just do simple red and green so I could see the differences between all of those. Okay, so our first task will be just creating curves. So I want to bring in an image, and a simple way to do that is type in picture. And you can retrieve a file, such as a JPEG or PNG, that you could bring in an image. So you guys will probably have one of these two, but I'll take this image. And we have some options. We could create the size by doing 2 clicks of one corner and then the other corner, just like that. And for this tutorial, it doesn't really matter what the scale of these objects that we're making. So here I've created a surface object that has our reference file in it. And what's pretty useful about this compared to background bitmap is that it's an object, and so you could edit it within the space in Rhino. So once you have your image input, does everybody have their image? I'm assuming yes, if nobody answers. So once we have our image, we can try to create this profile of a horn. We're going to create these horn profiles using a curve and then applying a cross-sectional curve to that geometry, so that becomes like a cylindrical profile. So we could go to our curves tab at the top, and we have freeform. And from there, we probably concerned with just these 4 items. And I'll show you how each one works, and you could determine which one you like the best. So control points, we can create our curve through different anchors. So I'm just selecting, or I'm just clicking down to create an anchor in which our curve will manipulate itself against. We'll go back to the curves tab, freeform, and this time we'll select the second one called interpolate points. And so the difference between the first one and this one is that our curve will be locked into where our reference points are selected. So whereas the other one, where you'll notice that the points were a little off from where the curves are, this command will allow the curves to intersect these points that you've selected. So this is, I would prefer this in order to create profiles of something that I want to copy, such as this. We'll go to the last one. This one I'm not a fan of, so I'm not going to teach you guys this. And then we have the sketch. So if you have some sort of tablet to work on in Rhino or Photoshop or whatever, then this becomes really useful because you can literally just sketch it out freehand, and it should approximate a curve that's really a lot nicer than what you've drawn. So those are several options in which we can create curves. I'll delete these. So what you'll notice is that each curve has their own set of grips, and these are called control points. Right now they're not active only until I select them, and you'll know it's selected when it's yellow. In order to keep them active, you can type points on, select that, and even when your curve or object is not selected, your control points are available. So let's look at this section for a little bit at the bottom. I have my ortho on, which just means that if I were to create a command or move an object, for example, it'll be locked into its 90-degree positions at up, right, down, and left. So I'll want that on, and I want my O-snaps on as well, which for some reason it's not showing up as blue, but you'll know that it's on because you have these checkboxes editable. Otherwise it'll be grayed out or it'll disappear, kind of like what I did. And what we can do is constrain some of our selection points to certain parts of an object. So I could select end, and so if I were to create a command such as a line, I can select the end of a line or an end of my reference image. So most of these would usually be corners. And I will turn on my near, say intersection and perpendicular. So what near is, it is locks to edges and curves. So now that I have my near snap toggled on, I could select anywhere within that curve or on the edge of a surface or 3D solid. And my intersection would just mean this. Intersection just means if I have two objects intersecting, I can select at that intersection. But be wary because when you have intersection on, you could also have apparent intersection. So I'll show you what that means by drawing this box. So physically, they are not intersecting. They're in two different spaces. Here now, I'll change this to ghosted. So I just right-clicked at the viewport title and then change my display option to ghosted so I could see through it. And visually, you could see that this line is crossing with this object. And so now I could snap to this apparent intersection, although if you were to change the view, then there's really no constant anchor between the two objects other than you being able to visually see them intersect. So I would just advise you, or just be aware that that may be an option for you to select, but it's not the best because it's not a physical intersection between the two objects. Okay, so I'll have my end near, I guess point on midpoint, which is just the midpoint of a curve or edge. So I'll have these four on and the last two. Perp just means perpendicular to the direction of your object. So for example, I could start my line off here and I could ask it to become perpendicular to this box. And you'll know in the white rectangle that it's perpendicular. Okay, moving forward, let's go into our top viewport. And we'll want to now make a curve. Up to you to decide which curve you'd like to create. I would go with interpolate curve because it matches the control points. So I'll just start off at the base of the horn, and because we have ortho on, we can hold shift to toggle it on and off, and you'll see that it's toggling between active and inactive. So if you don't want ortho on, then just click it off and we'll just create our control points through the center or midpoint between the top and the bottom of the horn. So I'm just kind of evenly spacing out my control points, and wherever it's a little bit of a steeper curve, then the points are a bit closer. So I've done something like that, and I'll move on to the other side. Start at the base of the horn and click, decent amount of spacing in between curves. Okay, just let me know when you guys are finished with yours, and then we'll move forward. Is there a chat? Everyone's cool? Silence means yes. Okay.
Yes, guys, when you're, it's really important, please follow along and do like follow along with Eric, because it's important. If you have any problem, just tell us, because it's like you're learning and we're here to help. As a visual feedback, if you are ready, please in the participants window, you can open participants window and then you can click yes when you are ready. It will show that Eric can go ahead. If you cannot find participants window, just let us know.
So as I mentioned before, we could turn these control panels on. So I could select these curves, and I could select multiple objects by holding shift as I click them. And again, we'll type points on so that they're active even though they're not selected. Oh yeah, one thing we should do is change these layers. So I'll select these, and through this little tab below, we can change our lines so that they're on the correct layer. And then when we go to our layers panel, double clicks to make the active layer. And you'll know it's active because it has a check mark and bolded title. So now that we're working in the construction lines layer, let's keep moving forward. You can adjust your curve shape using this useful gumball tool. So just select it to toggle it on, and you'll see that there's some arrows and lines that you could use to manipulate. The arrows can move the control point. These curved lines will rotate the control point. So at the moment, it's not really doing much because it's in the same plane. But if I were to go to perspective mode, I'll have more options. So I could kind of rotate this in the X direction. And so what I want you guys to do is, because this curve is planar, it's on the XY plane, we want to give it a little bit of dimension. So try manipulating some of these points. Oops. We can lock our reference image so it's not in the way through this lock icon. So what I want you guys to do is take some points and move them up and down with your gumball tool. So it just gives it a bit of dimension. You could select multiple, and those will also become manipulated. And if you want, you can just click the arrow and type in the dimension that you want. So I could put it 3 units up, just like that. So we'll do a little bit of manipulation of our curve. Okay, and then maybe a little at the front. Do the same for the other side. And it's always a good idea to refer back to your orthogonal view so that you can see what the changes are. This is a little too close to the top horn, so I'll move this a bit down. Yeah, so try to keep as centered as possible when you're making this. Okay, I'll give you guys a good 20 seconds and then we'll move forward. Okay, so one way we could make this a 3D solid is because it's a cylindrical shape. We can use the command called pipe, and it should be in the solids tab, and then you could type pipe and in the command bar, and that should also function the same way. So we'll select our pipe, and what that will do is create circular profiles at the end and the beginning of our curve, and then throughout, following those two. So first, it's asking us to select our rail. We'll select this curve that we've just adjusted. And here is where I'll probably go into plan position to see the extents of our circle and match it alongside the reference image that we have. But before we click, there are some options that we could look through. One of them is cap. So cap just makes this 3D geometry enclosed or fully solid. Otherwise, it's just going to be a surface that's wrapped around this profile, this curve profile. So we could click cap and check the options that we want. Right now it's default to none, but let's make the cap rounded. So this will give it a little bit of a continuous edge with the profile. So now when we decide to start clicking our curve cross-sectional profiles, it'll determine the first circle, and then we'll go to our second, which will be a lot smaller, so you'll want to zoom in, click, and then from there, once we've determined the two extents, we can go throughout the profile and add some more just to be more accurate with the shape of our horn. So I'll add a few in between that. This one's a bit difficult. Okay. And I'm pretty satisfied. We'll take a look in the perspective mode. Okay. And then when I hit enter, it should create our horn now. And I'll hide this reference image just to show you what this will look like a bit. So it's a little bit wonky, and that's just the nature of our curve profile also being a little bit uncontinuous at some points or unsmooth. So you could see that there's a little bit of wobbliness to it. So that just depends on how you are modifying your curve or how you're drawing it in the first place. Does anybody have questions on this approach using the pipe command. Nope. Okay, we'll move forward and now we'll go to this second curve that we've created. And we could do, this is not gonna follow our horn shape so much, but if you wanted to create a different profile that's not circular, we can use a command called sweep. And so we could create a profile, for example, like a rectangle that we can sweep along this curve. And so the profile will take the shape of whatever curve we've created. I'll start with a rectangle, so we could type rectangle or we could go to curve. I think it's polygon, no, rectangle's right there. And we'll do a vertical curve. So I want my curve to start, or a rectangle to start there. Here's might be useful to have the ortho snap on, so I'll click ortho. Now it's locked to my 90 degrees. Doesn't really matter what size, but I'll have it something like this. And when I go to my top view now, and I bring my reference image in, I could sort of manipulate that as well by moving it. Okay, something like that. And now when I type my sweep command, there's two sweeps. There's sweep 1 and sweep 2. The only difference is that sweep 1 will focus on one rail or path that we're going to sweep our cross-sectional profile. And sweep 2 will have two curves, and you could have multiple, two curves that we sweep along. So we'll focus on sweep 1. And it's asking us to select the rail, which is our curve. And now we have to select our cross sections, and that will be our rectangle. And really simple, just hit enter and enter again. And now we'll have this little dialog box that's just asking if we want to make this more freeform. So how do I describe it? Road-like will, so you see the difference is road-like will angle the curve alongside, angle the cross-section to the curve's angles, but freeform will keep it steady in one axis. So up to you to choose freeform or road-like. And so we have our curve, which doesn't taper, but that's just one way to create an interesting profile that you could sweep along, and that could be useful in some architectural form. And I'll just add another curve here. I'll do rectangle again, and we'll select vertical. So I've typed it into the command prompt, and now we could select our vertical from there. So I'll do a second rectangle that's a bit smaller, and I'll adjust that so it's somewhat in the middle. And you could use the same command, sweep 1. We'll select this profile rail, and then the two cross-sectional curves. And what I predict, or what should happen, is that this shape that was initially one profile will merge into these two profiles. So it'll be larger here and smaller there, but still follow this rail. We'll enter and enter. And again, you can decide if you want freeform or road-like. And there's our modified horn. If we bring back our image, Mr. Cow here has two nice geometries on his head, or her head, or their head. Okay, any questions so far? We'll be moving on to the next exercise.
Sorry, Eric, I have a question if you can answer. I'm not sure. It can be an unexpected question. If, for example, on one end of the horn you have a triangle, and on the other end of the horn you have a rectangle, how this...
That should work too, yeah. You could do any type of profiles. It's just having similar profiles will generate more ideal shapes versus having a circle and a rectangle. There will be one point where the continuous edge has to be divided into its
Could you
four
just
edges.
show
Yeah,
how it
I'll
will
show you.
work? Yeah.
So I have my square, and it might be helpful to drag this a little down so that its center point is somewhat aligned with this circle center point. And we'll do sweep 1, select the rail, and then we'll select our cross-sectional profiles. And here you can see that at some point in the middle is where it starts to, the circle or rectangle, whichever way you think about it, will deform into the other shape. And so if you're doing something like this, just be cautious of your rail curve, because depending on whether it's long like this, like a long distance from one profile to the other profile, it will merge nicely. But if it's a little shorter, then you'll probably have less transition space, and so the geometries might not merge as well as you'd like. So that's something just to keep in mind.
Is it possible to define like in between profiles?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
it's
definitely.
also possible? Okay, yeah, and then you can make it smoother. Okay, oh, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's just see what that looks like. I select my curves and then select my curves and then select the profiles following. And yep, there you go. You have multiple profiles to work with. All right, let's move on to the second task. So I am going to, again, reference another image that we have in our zip folder that I put in the chat. So we'll type picture, and we could choose a JPEG. I drew this up really quickly, so.
Just 1 second, Eric. Yeah, I'm guys, are you able to follow along? So do you follow along? Like, it's important that you, if you haven't done something like that in Rhino before, it's important because Eric is a very experienced user. So, and he's unconsciously, he's doing something which is not obvious to you. It's very important that you should repeat up, like follow his path in a way, trying to create something on your own. Are you able to do it? Do you need time? Like, if you'd like to do it now, tell us, because it's important.
Just in the participants panel, give me a yes or a no, so
or
that
in
I
chat,
can,
or just
yeah,
reply in chat.
yes or no, so that we can like move forward and I don't have to
Okay.
be, yeah, okay, great. Thanks, guys.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Let's keep doing that. Okay, so as we did before, we're gonna create our picture surface in which we could reference our profiles. So I just did, yeah, 2-click. Actually, in this case, instead of the top plane, which we usually work with, let's go to a front view or an elevation view. And then we'll place our picture from in there. Something like that. So when we look in perspective mode, it's at a different plane than our previous image is going to be in the XZ plane. And for this exercise, we're going to use the revolve command. And this is going to use an axis. So whatever profile that we create is going to be revolved around a center axis. And like what kind of applications can you make from this? Think of like a fountain, a circular fountain that has a beautiful profile and that it becomes revolved around an axis. And so that's essentially what we're doing here. Or what other
Column,
objects?
a
A
column.
column, yeah, exactly. A column, or, you know, if you want your railings to be a little interesting, then your railings would have a nice profile, or even like a doorknob. This will look like a doorknob. So up to you to decide if you want to work on this or this profile or both. So we'll draw a curve, and again, it's up to you to decide whether you want like interpolate or sketch or control points. This time I'll work with the first curve. Actually, no, it's better. I like the second curve. Interpolate points. So yeah, let's just start drawing. And since I have my ortho on, I'll want to hold shift to toggle it on and off. So I'm just dragging it. Oh, and I will switch to construction lines layer so that we're properly organizing our elements. So I'm gonna draw that. Again, where it's steeper curves, you might want to have more control points, like that. Okay, and when you're done a command or done a curve, you can press Enter or space to execute it or confirm the curve. Here's a straight line, so I'll probably use a regular line segment. So there, I have another curve. I'll use curve this time. So control point curve. And it's important that we have this OSNAP on and have end activated so that I could find where my curve is. It's a little difficult to see since it's red, so I might change that to a different color. There we go. Okay, and then again, defining the control points in which our curve will form along. And lastly, I'll do another line. This little picture thing is annoying me, so I will lock my reference images, and because they're all in the same layer, it'll be easy to toggle them on and off. So I have my profiles now that are going to be revolved around the axis. Now I have to create the axis. So that'll just be a straight line again, just like that. For this command, it doesn't really matter if the curves are a little short. Actually, they matter if they're short, but if they extend a little past it, that's fine. Might be helpful to draw the axis actually first and then the profile so that you could start off on one of, on the line as opposed to in space.
Yes, and then it's easier to keep your lines perpendicular to the X if you want it.
So yeah, give me a check mark if you guys are ready to go. Step forward. Okay, cool. And yep, revolve command is super simple. I'll just hide this layer, this reference image, so we could see what that looks like, and we'll go to perspective mode as well. So the command is revolve. And now it's asking us to select the curves we want to revolve. These are the curves. So remember that right to left, anything that's intersecting within this boundary will be selected. Dragging left to right will mean anything that's within the boundary will be selected. So it has to be fully enclosed, otherwise it won't be selected. So I'll show you again what that means. So if I were to select left to right, these straight line curves won't be included in my selection, just this curve line. Otherwise, select right to left to include anything that's intersected or within the boundary. And hold shift if you want to select multiple. So we've selected our curves and now we want to revolve them, which I lost the command. So revolve, and then it's going to ask us to create our axis. And because we created this line, now we could just simply click one end and the other end, and that will create our axis. Now we have a few options. We can go to the command bar to see what's available. In some cases, if it's a column that you're creating or something that's fully circular, we'll want to just create full circle, and it will automatically generate the geometry. As you can see, it's like a doorknob if you look at it sideways. But if you want to revolve around this axis, not as a full circle, then we'll redo the command again. Type revolve, select your curves, and enter when done, and then we'll create our axis again. And this time we could define an angle in which we start. I have my ortho on, so they're locked at 90. And from there, our second click will determine where our revolve will end. And so I could type in my degrees. So I could type in 180 and this would appear like this. Or I could simply click where I see visually fits. So I want to do something between 90 and 180, and this works just fine. And unfortunately, I don't think this command caps. So what I mean by cap is it'll enclose this so that it's fully solid and not just surfaces. So just be aware of that, and then you'll have to, I think maybe you can type cap and that should work. No, that doesn't work. Okay. Any questions for this one now? Yeah, so check mark if y'all are good. Nope. Oh, okay. All right, and lastly, we'll create a surface or form through several curves. So our last image that we have, we're not really going to reference it. We're going to analyze it and try to determine how to create the form through curves in different viewports.
I just want to ask you one thing. I'm sorry, I'm a bit late. So it's for the second example. If, for example, like as I understand, like you're keeping your curves on construction lines layer, right? And your final form should
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so once you're done, it's a good idea, as Leo mentioned, to place your form into the correct layer, or when you're executing command, just change the layer so that it will appear in that layer. So what I could do is, again, go to the bottom and check whichever layer I have. Another option is to go to the properties panel, and because all of these are selected, I can change my layer here as well. So I could change this to final form.
Yeah.
There's a third option too, which is typing in the command prompt. The command is called change layer. And we'll have a new dialog box that offers us the ability to select the layer, but also create a new one if one doesn't appear in the layers tab already. So most of the time I would just use this little drop down or drop up menu at the bottom.
Yeah, and then it's a way for you to keep your real model and like elements which you use to construct them like separate, right? Because otherwise they will be getting in the way when you're selecting. And
yeah, right. I'll just mention one more thing. So I'll delete my final form, but yeah, sometimes you don't want to keep these construction lines, and so there's an option in the revolve command. We'll go through the steps again to our axis to delete inputs. Right now it says is toggle at no, so that's why our curves are kept after we execute the command. But if you know that you're not going to use it, follow it on so that these curves will be deleted. And so what you're left with is only the surfaces for your revolve. But I suggest keeping them just in case ever you need to tweak that profile a bit and then redo the command. So it's up to your discretion whether you want that or not. Makes working continuously a lot quicker because you don't have to think about deleting every time or having this in the way. So it's up to you. All right, and our last exercise, we'll pull up one more reference image. So again, type picture to find a JPEG or PNG. These are the supported files, so that's how you know where you can retrieve. And we'll take our canopy. Let's see, we are in, yeah, let's stay in an elevation mode, but let's go to right this time. Click and drag. So we're going to create a form somewhat like this, and it's a little hard to determine exactly what the profiles we need to create this form, but we could sort of analyze and decipher and then decide how to make our profiles. So how I would make a form like this is I would take the cross-sectional profiles throughout the z-axis, and we'll use this command called loft, which will merge these profiles together. So as you can see at the bottom, we don't really know what that profile is. Could be a circle, could be like an adjusted rectangle. But then we know it becomes a little truncated going up, so it becomes a little smaller and then starts to enlarge in profile. And our last profile at the top is going to be like a 3D curve, and what I mean by that is it's not planar, it's not parallel to our XY surface. It's going to have like a little bit of an angle, and some points are going to be curved up or down. And it looks somewhat, I don't know, I want to say like rectangular, but rounded rectangle. So using this image, we can think of the profiles in different views. So right now we're looking at the elevation view, and they have these nice curves that spread out like a tree. And then we'll think about how these cross-sectional curves might look in our plan view or our top view. So what we could do now is we can make general like construction lines. So we'll switch to our construction layer and go to our curves tab and select whichever type of curve that we'd like to use. I'll use the first one, and it doesn't have to be really accurate. We're just having a little bit of an exercise. So something like that is already giving us the general shape of one side, and then we'll do that again for the second side. Okay. I feel like I should have done this in plan view actually. We'll keep moving forward. No, well, no, we should do this in plan. Okay. Sorry, guys. Yeah, we could go to our top view now, and actually, because this is a surface, we can make a copy of it. And place it onto the XY plane. So what we could do is select our objects. So we have our two curves here and our picture, which is on a surface. We're in perspective mode. So what I could do is I could make a copy, typing copy in the command bar. And we'll move this a little outward. And I want my ortho snap on, so that's in the same position roughly in the x-axis. Okay, so we've made a copy. Now we could flip it. So with my gumball tool activated, I could use this green quarter circle grip to adjust my rotation for it. So I'm in ortho, so it's locked to 90 degrees, but again, holding shift will take you out of that. Have it at 90 degrees now. Okay, and from here, why I wanted it in top view. So again, maybe we need to rotate this. We'll take this red grip and adjust that. So why I want it in top view is I want to see how our profiles will match up with our elevation profile. So what I mean by that is, let's say that this pavilion, even though it looks a bit rectangular at points, we'll just work with circles to make it really simple. Let's go to the curve command and type circle. And these are just various ways to create a circle. The easiest is probably selecting the center and then determining the radius. So select that. This is somewhat in the middle, so I'll start off by creating a center point, and then so here maybe we don't want to have snaps on. So here I'll turn snap off. It's all going to be freehand, and we're just going to roughly like determine where the circle is. And the reason why it's hidden is because we're above the working plane. So again, we should probably adjust this so that it's below our working plane. So we could select our objects, our curves, and our reference plane and drag it down. Okay. Let's go back to the top view, and I want to lock this. Okay. Now I'll reactivate our OSNAP, and in this case, maybe we'll turn everything off and only have center line. I mean center snap. So we'll only be connecting to whatever the center is of our circle. So I want to create another circle. Same method, center and radius. And I find that the easiest way to snap to the center is hovering your cursor over the profile of that shape, and then it'll lock onto center. So we have another circle, which we're going to try to create 8 to the smallest dimension in our elevation. So it's about here where my cursor is, and it'll be a little bit shallower. So the extents will be somewhat smaller. That's where it's truncated. So what I'm doing now is just creating all the profiles that are pretty unique and would be helpful to determine the shape of this geometry. Do another circle again. This time I'll match it to around, midpoint there. So I'm aligning to somewhere here. Yeah, and then we'll do our last circle. Or you could do square or whatever shape you want as the top profile. Again, click the center and match like the extents of this. It's a little bit smaller, but yeah, you get the gist of it. Okay. What we'll do now is we'll bring these profiles so that they the base is aligned with the base of our profile here. So what I could do is I could move these profiles to the same plane. So I could type move, and we'll have only one option for our move command. We could change it to vertical, and that's what we want to do. We want to move it up in the Z direction. So I'll toggle it on as yes, and I'll move this curve. Now I'll select like an endpoint and maybe near, so that I could select this endpoint of our elevation curves and bring it to the same level as our circle profiles. And you'll know it's in line if it doesn't seem to budge after you are referencing another snap point. So we'll change it there. And what we'll do now is rotate this 3D. So if you recall from yesterday's tutorial, we did a rotate 3D command, which I could select my objects and then create our 3D axis. So I'll just select the endpoints for one side of the axis, the second endpoint for the other side, and we're literally just lifting it up so it'll be a 90-degree angle that we're creating. So we could click here if we have our ortho on and move it slightly down, and it should lock onto the next 90 degrees. And now our curves are rotated in the X and Z plane. Are you guys good so far? Check mark, check mark. Height, height. Now we'll move these curves up to whatever position that we sort of determine. So my largest curve, I'll move up to about the top. And here now we could go to one of our elevation views to assist us. Might be useful to hide some of these. So we don't need our reference image anymore, and we don't need our final forms. So what we're left is with construction lines. And you know what, it would have been a better way to organize our layers if we had these as sub-layers to each exercise. So each exercise would have their own layer for their construction line, so these wouldn't show up. But in that case, we could also, it's not the best practice, but we could also select these curves and type hide, and they should be in this magical place where they're not showing up in our 3D world. And if you want them to reveal, you could type show. Hide and show are pair commands, I would say. So in the time being, we'll hide these and go to our front view. So there okay, it's approximately at the right height. We'll switch back to our perspectives, select another curve, or we could just unmaximize our viewports by double clicking, and it should bring back to our 4 viewports. And we'll move these so that they're in the right position. And our last truncated portion is about there. So now we can loft. We don't really need these. We can keep it or we can delete it. We can loft our, so I'm going to surface, loft, or you could type loft. And we could select them, but it's important to select them in order and sort of in the same general location, because once I type enter, there'll be this second command which is trying to determine whether the direction of these curves, and curves will have a direction, make sure that they're consistent and also follow a profile that's not like too far from each other. It's the most optimized line to make this profile. So I've hit enter, And now I'm brought into this second, or this dialog box, which gives us options to determine how strict we are creating our surface to these profiles. So normal, we'll try to adjust as much as possible to the extents of these curves, but you could make it looser or tighter. And if you want straight sections, but I wouldn't suggest that unless, you know, that's what you're going for. It just removes that smooth continuity of the surface. And I'm just noticing that this tutorial is going on forever, so I'll go a little quicker. So we'll just say normal for now. And if we do not simplify, we'll just take the default of Rhino's dialog settings, but we can rebuild it with control points, meaning we can add more ISO curves. These are what they're called. So something like 30 will give us more ISO curves, so make it more accurate, versus having fewer control points would make it less accurate. And so although it's quite smooth, you don't have the accuracy of it forming to our circle. So we'll do something like 20, conservative amount, and okay. I forgot to mention about the rebuild command, which allows us to okay, I'm just building a curve is what I'm doing. And the rebuild command can allow us to adjust the amount of control points we have to an existing curve or to a surface. So quickly, I'll just show you what that does, rebuild. And what we have in parentheses are our current line. So we have 15 control points, but if we put fewer and we preview, you can see it's somewhat deformed, but it's also a lot smoother than what we had here. You could see that there's a little bit of some segmentation with our curve. So this is a way to modify your curve if you want it to have more adjustments, like we're having more points, and it'll also separate your control points in even spacing. So that makes it a lot nicer to just create smoother curves and modify it generally as opposed to locally. And what I mean by locally is that when you have a lot of control points bunched together, then you're not really spreading that modification along the curve. You're just locally changing it with that cluster of points. And degree, oh, this is a whole nother concept, but simply you'll want to...
Eric, I think we should keep it for another tutorial.
Okay, sure, okay. So yep, you can rebuild that curve, and now it's taken on that new number of control points. And similarly, you could do the same with the typing rebuild again, but for a surface. And here, what U and V just means is the lines that are crossing each other at two axes. No, I could explain it better. You can divide your surfaces into various rectangular segments, and these are divided in two axes. So you have one that's called the U and then one that's called the V, and they're intersecting each other perpendicularly. So again, you can control point counts, so I can make it lower and it'll be smoother, or I can make it higher. It'll be a little bit more precise, but sometimes you lose that smoothness and continuity. And again, you could do that in the V direction too. I don't know what 2 would do.